This is part two of The Trickster, read by author Jason Lee Willis. Chapter 9, Where There's Smoke. Old Copper Road, December 20th, 1985. Brian Forsberg stood at the cigar butt while the others scurried around the charred remains of the ice house. Lights of ambulances and patrol cars parked along the highway illuminated the ice, but dawn brought a world of gray into view. "Oh, for Pete's sakes," the sheriff mumbled to himself, realizing none of his deputies had noticed where he stood. He put his fingers in his mouth and whistled loudly for enough for everyone in the small army on Haggard Bay to stop and turn. He waved the crowd toward him, and luckily a patrolman came jogging over to where Forsberg stood a few hundred yards away from the shore. "Is that Lieutenant Harper at the fishing shack?" "Yes, sir," Patrolman Gerber answered and glanced down at the dark object on the ground. "What do you find, sir?" "Go tell Harper to get everybody off the ice and back on the highway. Folks are going to be driving into town and wanting to see what's going on. I want things tight by the time the BCA gets here." "They found a second body. A kid." "The work of Eos?" "Leave it alone," Forsberg said. "Should we fish it out?" "BCA will decide what to do. I want you to drive your patrol car back down to Sterling Junction and find this access road. I want to make sure nobody comes up that road for a better view of the murders." "Murders?" Forsberg didn't explain himself to Patrolman Gerber, who took the hint and went back to the burned ice house. When the fire had been called in, Forsberg had just finished his morning coffee and drove directly to Haggard Bay from his home, 7 miles away on the east side of Lake Manitou. It had taken a moment's glance to know the accident was arson, so he set out to discover the scope of the crime scene. The cigar butt told him more than the burned ice house. The patrolmen and EMTs vacated the ice as ordered, and Lieutenant Griff Birdman Harper came walking across the ice with Disco Ron Spears, the emergency management director. Forsberg's knee already ached, so he sat on his haunches until the two officers arrived. "What do you got, Biff?" Harper asked. Only folks who knew Forsberg since childhood dared to still call him Biff, but Harper had worked at the Hiawatha County Sheriff Department prior to Forsberg, and as a graduate from Wadena High School, still found inopportune times to tease his childhood rival. Forsberg stared daggers at him for a moment before answering. "Do you remember the Truce case? The child molester that almost got you." Forsberg didn't quibble about the misrepresentation of fact. Harper remembered. "If not for a well-placed pitchfork, the guy's plan was to drop my body onto a sled, haul me out onto the ice, and drop me through a big hole in the ice, hidden by an ice house." Harper turned back around to the smoldering ruins of the ice house while Spears studied the cigar butt and scanned for other clues on the shore. Forsberg continued. "You and I know that a bonfire on the ice would not burn a hole through the ice. A few pieces of plywood? Please. That hole was already there, and those bodies were already wet before the ice house went up in flames." "What, you think it's the same guy?" "Of course not," Forsberg said with a bit of disdain. "That was 26 years ago. All I'm doing is drawing comparisons. Somebody stood right on the shore, undoubtedly near a parked car, smoking a cigar. When the BCA arrives, I want tire track analysis and forensic examination on this cigar butt." "You want me to hold off on getting those bodies out?" Spear asked. Like Harper, he was a middle-aged man comfortable around death. He wore a polyester windbreaker with a faux fur collar, but unlike the others, he did not wear a hat and allowed his thick silver mane to be moved like twigs of a tree. Forsberg met Spears in college. A decade later, Forsberg lured him to Hiawatha County to be his emergency management director. His calm, discerning manner had yet to disappoint. "Those bodies aren't going anywhere. No offense, but I'd like the BCA to do all the heavy lifting on this one." Harper and Spears solemnly nodded and left to gather up their respective teams. Guarding the cigar butt certainly key evidence, kept him from peering down at another dead kid in Lake Manitou. When did death first arrive at Lake Manitou? A Hiawatha County patrol car ended his silent vigil as it led a black BCA van up the Sterling Junction Road to the backside of Haggard Bay. A second van arrived moments later. The men who came out of the van first looked more like scientists than law enforcement, acknowledging the elements with childish expressions. Some of the team guarded the scene at the ice house, and others went to where Forsberg stood. "What do you have there, Sheriff Forsberg?" "You tell me," he said, stepping aside. "A fresh cigar butt, smoked so recently that the wrapping has not absorbed any water from melting ice," one agent said following inspection. "A jewel of information," another said. "Cigars can tell quite a story under a microscope." "I'm going to want to hear some stories sooner rather than later." He released his breath, feeling the chill setting in. "I'll leave you to it." Forsberg felt eyes upon him as he walked the 200 yards across the bay to where he had parked his SUV along the side of the road. Once he was joined by Lieutenant Harper and Director Spears. A short woman in an oversized parka emerged from a white station wagon parked nearby. Mia Donaldson. His personal assistant held a thermos of coffee and a bag from a local bakery. 26 years ago, he and Jimmy Nielsen snuck into Haggard Quarry near the same spot where Mia stood. And as all the duties of responsibility overwhelmed him, he couldn't help but remember a time before the flood. Now, Jimmy Nielsen and Chris Looning were dead. Neither could help him sort through the clues this time. A flash caught his eyes, and he spotted a parked truck on a small hill overlooking the lake. "He knows I'm in over my head," Forsberg decided, acknowledging the truck's owner, Wally Crane. "I think I agree with the old coot." Chapter 10. And Through the Woods. Hiawatha County is located in central Minnesota in what once was known as the Big Woods, which were mostly harvested by the turn of the century. It covers 1,300 square miles of lakes, rivers, fields, and forests. The population hovers around 20,000, with St. John being the largest town and the county seat at 6,000. The county is framed by well-traveled highways. Highway 71 running north to south along the western border, Highway 371 flanking its eastern border, 4-lane Highway 210 along the bustling southern border, and Highway 64 proceeding through the center of the county north to south. For the McPherson family, who loaded up the Brown Beast, their 15-passenger Dodge van, it was a 60-mile drive from their farm near Split Rock to Leech Lake in Cass County. Normally, the Brown Beast drove south to Sioux Falls for Christmas, but this year, Grandma Hannah and Aunt Charlotte showed up on Friday night to join them for the Christmas Eve morning trip north. Grandma Lily was dying of cancer and would not live to see another Christmas. Levi sat in the back row against the window. Joey and Daniel slept across the large bench seat. In hierarchy by age, Ben, who'd returned from school, and Reuben sat in the seat in front of him, with Leah slumped against the window to sleep. Ben sat with his girlfriend of 3 years, Tammy, who would be taking him to her family the next day. In the forward bench, Aunt Charlotte and Levi's mother sat together. A bit of a recluse, who took it upon herself to tend to Grandma Hannah 2 decades ago, Aunt Charlotte would go from morose to jovial in a snap, and Levi's mother did her best to tap dance around the issues that would provoke her. Grandma Hannah, an obese woman who gave incredible hugs, kept a running commentary of every house and farmstead along Highway 64, while Levi's father Gavin drove the van. "So, what is the deal with the double murder I read about in the newspaper this morning?" Grandma Hannah asked abruptly when they turned at the town of Bacchus. Levi perked up, and so did his older siblings. Forsberg told me they didn't think either of the victims were local," Dad hedged, "and it was most likely a way to dump the bodies." "Brian said the ice house didn't have registration and was just put there a few days earlier," Mom added. "Mom's on a first-name basis with the sheriff?" Levi wondered. No one at school on Friday knew anything about what had happened, and his obsession with crow care caused him to forget all about the news. That is why I had to get away from this place, Grandma Hannah said. What is it about Lake Manitou that draws all the crazies? You can say that again, Aunt Charlotte added. It's nice that nothing like this ever happens in Sioux Falls, Mom said quickly. Sensing Mom's snarkiness, Levi's father quickly threw out some more information. It appears as if the killer set the ice house on fire after leaving the bodies. Wally Crane told me he could see it burning from the edge of town. Mrs. Crane is retiring at the end of the year, Levi's mom commented as if to change the subject. I didn't get to go to public school, Aunt Charlotte complained. I had to go to Turtle Island. Still grown women and still bitter, Levi observed. Is it true one of the victims was a child? Leah asked. Apparently, Dad answered. But Sheriff Forsberg didn't know the age since he didn't know the identity of the victims. No missing child reports? Ben asked. Apparently not. What is it, some sort of mob thing? Reuben wondered. Can we please talk about something more pleasant? Mom insisted, and everyone turned to their window views. Levi, worrying that the crow was a harbinger of bad things, agreed. Outside of Levi's window, Agency Bay and Walker Bay were a sheet of white ice, equal to the size of Lake Manitou, yet only an arm of the massive lake. I wonder if Lily had bad dreams too. The Brown Beast soon stopped at Wanakawiti Retirement Home, a modern plain care facility. All 11 of them piled out of the van and headed for the front door. Fozzie liked the dog food we brought him, Joey said to Levi as they moved through the lobby of the facility. He ate the entire bowl. Was the water dish frozen? Levi asked. Just the top. I broke it open for him. Is his wing any better? Daniel asked, having learned about the crow by Tuesday morning. I think it was just a cut, not a break, Levi said. Fozzie didn't speak a syllable in front of Daniel, who quickly lost interest. Plus, Levi had threatened him to not bother it. On Saturday, after repairing the broken window and cleaning the blood, Levi revealed the bird's identity to his father, leaving out the details of how the crow hurt his wing, which would raise alarm from his parents. His father had recommended the dog food, which was far more practical than what the library books recommended. If I'm lucky, he'll let me keep it in the barn once its wing is healed. The family congested at Lily's doorway. Lily Guerin sat in her chair and looked at the ice of Agency Bay. Having met with Lily at least once a week for the past few months, Levi lingered in the back as his mother introduced everyone. When it was his turn, Levi sheepishly approached, and Gigi Lily rattled him with her offhand comment. "This one looks like my father," she said. "My father was a criminal." The whole family chuckled, prompting eye rolls from Levi, who bore the brunt of the joke as the black sheep of the family. Lily had explained much of her life prior to her encounter with the spirits of Lake Manitou, so Levi knew about Big Squeak Weber and his time as a bootlegger. She'd just told him about Big Squeak recently, which rattled him, yet Gigi managed to keep their visits and relationship hidden from the family. When it came time for moving Lily to the family room, Levi volunteered to push her wheelchair down the hallway. During the slow-moving parade, Lily reached a hand out and touched his hand. "The time approaches," she said cryptically. Levi knew all about the 7 fires, the coming comet, and even the Asante Lodge, but he couldn't be certain what she meant. As they entered the large family room, he leaned in closer to ask, "Time for what?" "It is time for you to close the first loop," she said, and then looked up at the popcorn ceiling of the white room. "The dark spirits stir once again, but we are going to give them quite a surprise, aren't we?" "I hope so," Levi answered, stepping away from her as the family packed the room and began chattering. Softly, Lily gave him one more private comment. "Come visit me in a few days. and we'll talk about the willow tree. Chapter 11. More Thunderbird Than Jeep. St. John, Minnesota, December 26, 1985. Sheriff Brian Forsberg chewed on each fact for so long that by the time he spit it out, the members of the press looked bored and agitated. He kept both hands on the side of the oak lectern, which held 3 microphones. In his 5 years as sheriff of Hiawatha County, he'd seen up to a dozen microphones clipped to a lectern and triple the number of people in the press room. The 3 XLR cables ran across the floor to the back of the room where 3 television cameras recorded his every word. The local CBS crew from Bemidji, as well as 2 young crews from the Twin Cities, had come. In the front row, he saw several familiar faces from local print and radio outlets. An agent from the BCA stood off to the side. Andrew Ross? Forsberg confirmed with a glance down at the notebook. It was the only piece of information he hadn't committed to memory. Standing in front of the closed maroon blinds, Lieutenant Griff Harper crossed his arms and nodded along. If Forsberg botched any facts, his lead investigator would bail him out. Harper wore a suit with a name badge at his chest pocket, while Forsberg wore his traditional white shirt, brown tie, and brown shoulder boards, which gave the impression that it was more than just 15 minutes out of a normal day. Unlike other press conferences, there were hardly any local citizens, so the room held a strangely apathetic tone than heightened meetings in the past. No one wants to talk about murder a day after Christmas. Brian had been to training sessions that warned of perpetrators attending a press conference under the anonymity of a crowd, but today would not be such a day. Several friendly faces gathered for support, the Asante Lodge. Earl Wally Crane nodded along with each fact, sat behind the reporters in the second row. In front of the chalkboard along the back wall, Mayor Chuck Looning of Split Rock stood holding his chin, occasionally whispering to Chief Deputy Dave Rybar, who readily ran the day-to-day operations of the department, but would bolt out the door if the press asked him any questions. Wally and Chuck are worried this is an EOS issue. The young district attorney sat with his own table beside the front row of reporters. Dressed in an expensive suit, the DA jotted down notes on a yellow legal pad, trying to justify his presence. Conversely, a young man wearing a Bemidji State Beavers hockey jersey under a insulated flannel shirt scribbled in a pocket notepad upon his lap. All had come for their own reasons. At the center of the room, where the black XLR cables spanned the 10 feet of carpet between the lectern and the crowd, his trusty secretary, Mia Donaldson, busily typed a transcript of every word he had said to be released in print form from the department. Occasionally, her face would wear a mask of abject horror when he spoke in medical or forensic terminology. 20 minutes after walking into the press room, Chief Deputy Rybar cleared his throat for his only sentence of the press conference. On behalf of the Hiawatha County Sheriff's Department, we'd like to thank you for coming. We'll send out updates and press releases as they happen. Rybar then swung the door open and drew the blinds, flooding the room with reflective light from the wintry background. Agent Ross shook his hand. "Do you need me to stay?" Brian stepped back. "We've got it. Just call when those lab results come in." "Of course, Sheriff Forsberg." The television crews had already taken down their cameras and were out the door, while the local press rushed up to Lieutenant Harper for another perspective, which was standard procedure. Wally Crane quietly passed through the crowd towards him, extending a leathery hand, and nodded, "We'll talk soon." Chuck Looning also vanished with the reporters. Although 2 nameless victims, including a young boy, had drawn the attention of the media, the lack of a local connection or even a cohesive dramatic narrative weakened interest. By the time New Year's passed, Forsberg sadly suspected it would be wholly forgotten, except for the reporter in the hockey jersey. Percy Thorgard wore a mask of a perpetual crooked smile, as if he had headphones on and listened to a comedy routine while the rest of the world dealt with reality. His legs were kicked out and his water-resistant boots crossed at the ankles. He still held his little flip pad and stayed in his own world until Forsberg took the bait and stopped on his way to the door. You watch the Vikings game? I can't believe they blew that game, Thorgard said. I got my hopes up after the Tampa Bay game, but not even Bud Grant could turn around this franchise. Thorgard winced, following Forsberg as they walked out of the press conference. AC is a heck of a receiver. If Wilson had time to throw, we might surprise folks. The discussion continued as the two walked out the door, down the hallway, and all the way back to the main offices of the sheriff's department. Percy, still a kid in Forsberg's eyes, worked for the North Star News, a county paper out of St. John. A few years earlier, the high school hellion had found himself staring down the drawn service revolver of Deputy Forsberg. The incident stayed private and put young Thorgard on a new path that led him to a journalism degree at Bemidji State University. In 1982, Thorgard joined the North Star News as a sports reporter and, from time to time, covered more serious news. He flitted around like a pilot fish around a shark as Brian dealt with a series of issues at the front desk. At one point, while Mia Donaldson went through the laundry list of questions, Thorgard sat down in the cushioned chair in the lobby corner and flipped through a magazine. But when Brian turned towards his office, Thorgard tossed the magazine aside and resumed a conversation about University of Minnesota men's basketball team. Thorgard kept talking even while Brian sat at his desk and flipped through the papers. The 25-year-old reporter could talk sports for hours, so finally, Forsberg gave him what he wanted. So, what do you want to know, Percy? The flip pad stayed in his pocket. The conversation was off the record. It was personal. Do you have a suspect yet? Yeah, Lake Manitou. Your department closed off access roads leading to the south side of the bay. Most folks who set up for ice fishing come off the highway or through the channel. Since there was no vehicle identified, I gotta assume you found something on the south side of the bay. This kid would have been a great detective. You're absolutely correct. You assume correctly, but it is a dead end. What did you find? Cigar butt, tire tracks, and footprints. The BCA came to the same conclusion I did. Whoever dumped those bodies in Lake Manitou left no clues or motives. Thorgard grinned. Yeah, they did. Enlighten me. Hypothetically, if I had to dispose of two bodies, I do like the ice fishing idea. Ice auger, sled, bulky equipment, they're good cover, right? Plus, ice fishermen can be active day or night, so no one would take notice. But if I did kill two people and drove a day or two away from home, picking some random lake, why would I burn down the ice house and draw attention to it? Sharp kid. Let's see where this goes. Yeah, why would you? I'll tell you why. A ritual. If you were hiding a body, you wouldn't need the ice house. But if you were doing something unnatural, then the ice house would hide it, and a fire would cover all traces of what you did inside. There was more evidence than just bodies, don't you think? Brian had already gone down this dark path. Not bad, Percy, Forsberg said with a wry smile. Do you want to know what the BCA guy thought? Sure. Psychological remorse. The person who dumped the bodies wanted them to be found because of a connection to the victims. So you're looking for a housewife whose husband and son went fishing and never came back? Do you buy that? I have a feeling that a year from now we still won't know the identity of either of those two bodies. Your suspect didn't leave any clues? Oh, I got tire tread and cigar type all figured out, but they're not going to give me any answers, are they? Do you think I'm going to make any arrests with this evidence, even if I knew the name of a suspect? Thorgard did not debate as his eyes remained fixed on his lap. So, this is more Thunderbird than Jeep? I should recruit him for the Asante Lodge. He'd love the monster theories. Percy had crossed the line. Are you... Not today, Percy. Just go away. I don't have time for this nonsense. Leave. Percy looked up. But leave, Percy. Thorgard looked up quickly, pushing his chair out of the way, but he stopped abruptly at the door of the office and turned to ask, You tell me if this were a Jeep situation? Leave! Brian fumed with a little more volume before Thorgard retreated. Brian added, Next time you come here asking questions like that, bring a bottle of Absolute. Brian did not watch him leave, but sifted through the paperwork given to him by Mia Donaldson for a few more minutes. Then, alone in his office, he leaned back in his chair and let a quiver of emotion pass through before he grit his teeth. I can't deal with the supernatural, but monsters don't smoke cigars. I can focus on cigars. He pushed both his big leather chair away from the large desk of papers from his present attention. He spun around, glancing at a floor-to-ceiling bookcase filled with photos and memorabilia. On the adjacent wall, a metal organizer held dozens of binders, and next to it, a small 3-drawer file cabinet stared at him with more speculation than Percy Thorgard offered. More Thunderbird than Jeep, he shuddered. I fucking hope so. Brian opened the bottom drawer, and his right hand went to the files 7 inches from the front. His fingers hesitated when he saw the file for Wesley Thorgard. Percy Thorgard's father had died in an accident involving Lake Manitou, thin ice, and a red Jeep. While tragic, it had an explanation rooted in reason. A Thunderbird case was an unsolved mystery involving sinister secret societies. Percy Thorgard had done his digging into old cases and, in a drunken stupor, confessed his theories to Brian, who met him halfway. Acknowledging the order of Eos shut up Thorgard and brought him back to the grim reality of life. A Jeep case leaned toward the supernatural. Wesley Thorgard was likely killed by a Takpai. Brian ended up rereading through the notes of his predecessor had left in the Troost file. Even though it had been an open and shut case for the press, Betzing privately had doubts. Brian's own eyewitness account, documented in the file, left the most paradoxical clue, a pitchfork wound. To save his buddy Chris, Brian had thrown a pitchfork, which not only struck Troost but also Looning. Sheriff Betzing compared the wound on Looning with the 2 puncture wounds on Troost, noting the healing on Looning compared to the fresh nature of the wound weeks later on Troost, as well as the difference in height from a standing position. Betzing knew it was a lie, but he couldn't prove it. He sat in the same office, unable to act. Chris Looning told Sheriff Betzing how he smelled smoke on the man's breath, and sure enough, when investigators found Troost, they also found a pack of Camels and a Bic lighter. Brian had been close enough to smell the breath of the man with chloroform, but he'd been with Chris a few months earlier when a red Thunderbird stopped along Old Copper Road. A gruff man smoking a cigar rolled down the window, and an exotic-looking fellow in a white suit called out from the passenger seat, looking for direction to Lily Guerin's house, which burned down a short time later. Investigators ruled it an accidental fire, and no arson investigation was filed. But us kids knew. After Logan Troost hanged himself, things went back to normal until the day a bus drove into the floodwaters of Lake Manitou, and Brian Forsberg again smelled the same sweet cigar smoke he'd smell pour out of the red Thunderbird. Like his predecessor, Brian had a collection of facts, but none of the puzzle pieces fit each other. Yeah, Percy, I think this one is more Thunderbird than Jeep. Chapter 12. Over the River. Old Copper Road, December 28th, 1985. The final Christmas celebration filled the house with smells that drifted all the way up to the attic. Levi set his presents on his bed and sorted through the CDs, books, clothing, and musical equipment in privacy. After unwrapping presents in the dining room, things had gotten way too loud and congested for him. Grandma Hannah, Aunt Charlotte, and Uncle Cameron, another Garen, arrived after breakfast. And great-uncle Dale McPherson brought his wife and Grandma Ida, another McPherson, just before lunch. Even though Joey's sleeping bag remained on the floor, he and Daniel played with their new toys downstairs. Ormus played in the background, a renewed obsession since his Night of the Crow. Along with Metallica and Iron Maiden, Ormus ranked as one of Levi's favorite heavy metal bands due to their reliance on mythology and occult themes, something his mother despised. The ruined cassette had already been replaced by a CD, yet he still searched for meaning in the act, so he fixated on the British band. The song Longest Night, played in the background, and the lyrics gave him pause. Winter demons scratching at my door. Drag in the Yule tree, a sacrifice to Thor. Levi tried to tell his mother once that decorating a Christmas tree was an ancient pagan ritual, but she refused to listen to his point. The song referenced the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, which happened a few days earlier. What a weird week it's been. Levi walked over to the window, which had been repaired with duct tape and plexiglass. The attic always was the warmest room in the house, so his repair job more than did the trick. Dad still didn't know about it yet. Although the front of the house faced the Crow Wing River, the rear, including his window, faced the wooded slope that led to Lake Manitou. The roof of the fort could be seen just 20 feet from the window, which allowed him to look down on Fozzie. Beyond that, the barren woods descended to frozen ice of Lake Manitou. The brush of Carousel Island obstructed much of the lake, but he could see the distant western shore where the ice house murders happened. He wished he knew more than gossip. Newspapers weren't delivered on holidays, and the family did not turn on the television with company over. 3 bizarre events, the murders, the crow, and Lily, all drove Levi to solitude to sort through it all. He picked up the Ormus CD and studied the lyrics and liner notes. He'd already read all the biographies of the band members, so he turned to the production team. The band was signed to Atlas Records, owned by Alistair Sinclair, one of Europe's most powerful media moguls. His granddaughter, Maddie Sinclair, served as the band's promoter, and, "Boys, time to eat," Leah called up the stairs. With 3 Garins and 9 McPhersons gathered for lunch, Levi had to sit at the kids' table in the kitchen with Reuben, Daniel, and Joey, while Ben and Leah joined the adults. As mysterious as Great-Grandma Lily proved to be, Uncle Cameron creeped him out even more. While the rest of the adults exchanged pleasant, if not shallow, conversation, the can man fixed his dead eye on Joey. A servant of light or a servant of darkness? Cameron Guerin appeared harmless and was a bit embarrassing. Due to some sort of accident or illness, the 51-year-old had a dead eye, white hair, and a pronounced limp. He worked as a custodian at St. Marie's Catholic Church, and when he wasn't lurking there, he prowled the streets of Split Rock on his blue bicycle, collecting stray cans and bottles for recycling. Why the hell is he looking at Joey? Just then, the eye focused on him, and Levi looked down at his plate. Feeling his uncle's gaze, he shoveled in his food quickly, dropped his plate in the sink, and darted for the mudroom to once again escape. Outside, he took a few deep breaths. It's Christmas break. If I'm ever going to be guarded from evil, it'll be this week. So he stepped out into the old forest and opened himself to answers. Although trees fringed most of the 7-mile-long lake, a dense swath of oaks grew along its southern side, beginning midway at Turtle Island and continuing along the southern shore where the shore turned back north at Buffalo Creek. From there, the granite bluffs thinned the oaks, but those that took roots were some of the oldest and largest along the lake. According to Lily, the Lake Manitou held powerful magic for good and evil in its foundations. For the past several weeks, she had chattered away about occult matters as if discussing Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy. Cecil Oakes, great Uncle Donnie, just 6 years older than his father, debated with his father one day while they were working in the back feedlot. Levi's father tried to make a point about Lake Manitou's indigenous history, but Uncle Donnie countered with a strange theory about the trees. The Ojibwe people were still in Michigan when the first explorers came to the Great Lakes region, but there were towering oaks all along the shores of Lake Manitou when white settlers came here in the early 1800s. A white oak can live 400 years. How's that prove anything? A forest doesn't get planted, it just grows, his father responded. Uncle Donnie kept arguing. These are Cecil Oaks. Cecil oaks are from Scotland. I'm telling you, these oaks are some sort of land claim. Scots were here 100 years before the Ojibwe arrived. But what does it mean? Does Lily know about the oaks? He headed north. Although a pine could take root in a crack of solid ground, an oak tree needed root space, which is why the top of the granite bluff had pines and almost no oaks. As the highest point along the shore, the wind kept any snow from collecting along the top of the ridge, making Levi's walk quite easy. But no willows. Both Lily and the shadowy figure from his dream mentioned willows, but in the dead of winter, most deciduous trees looked the same. Although the McPherson family owned hundreds of acres above the eastern side of Crow Wing River Valley, those acres were purchased years after Donald McPherson built his dairy farm along the scenic but agriculturally worthless plot of land. Yet according to his father, dairy farming only needed a solid foundation for a barn with good drainage and clean water. Gustav Forsberg also realized the value of the property for dairy farming and purchased the plot of land north of the McPherson property. There was no marker, fence, or wall that divided the two neighbors, except for the fact that the highest part of the bluff divided the property. When Levi found himself going downhill, he knew he was on Forsberg land. Although Edna Forsberg still lived in the house, the barn had been retired for a decade, a relic of the past. There were cars in the driveway, including the sheriff's SUV. Another Christmas party hanging out with a grandma, Levi realized, and did his part to stay as close to the lake as he could to sneak past the house. The McPherson kids had run wild over the entire end of the lake, so his presence would likely be ignored if seen. Even before Gigi Lilly told him about the place, Levi already knew about the existence of Bleeding Rock. According to legend, during the Ojibwe-Dakota Wars of the 1700s, vengeful Ojibwe zealots took a dozen children to the granite cliff as sacrifices. Another variation of the legend said it was 12 Dakota women. A third variation claimed it was called Bleeding Rock because the fissures in the granite bled blue vitriol. Reuben once went there with a bunch of other preppy kids to drink and returned unaffected by the stories of folks who fell from the 40-foot cliffs to their death. If Lake Manitou was the Lake of Souls, then Bleeding Rock was the epicenter of evil. Even in winter, Levi had no problem finding the location. Stacks of flat rocks and uksuks stood as silent sentries around the perimeter of the bald opening in the forest. Knocking one over was a bad omen, one that the recent teen drinkers respected, leaving behind plenty of bush beer cans without knocking over a single pile. Levi knelt down at the center of the opening and with his fingers felt the carved channel in the stone, a channel meant to collect blood and funnel blood. With cold sobriety, Levi waited for answers. What is the meaning of it? Jesus, dreams, murders, strange rituals, a talking crow, the Manitou? Is any of it real? Is it? Levi asked aloud, yet the lake, rocks, and trees remained silent. Bullshit. Frustrated and cold, Levi returned to head toward home. Then at the top of the ridge, Joey stood, scanning the trees. Did you lose it? Levi shouted out, helping his brother find his location. Joey flinched with fright until he spotted Levi. Then he shouted, Dad is looking for you. Oh no, why do I have a feeling Joey stirred up trouble with the crow? Joey was halfway home when both boys turned. Once back at the house, Levi saw his father heading into the enclosure of the fort. What did Joey do? Luckily, he heard garbles and clucks, indicating the bird was still alive and well. Once he reached the foot of the treehouse, Levi called out, Need something, Dad? His father remained in the opening for a moment and then stepped down, pulling the trapdoor closed. You can't keep it in a treehouse. It's going to shit all over and make a total mess. But we're just keeping it till its wing heals. And how exactly did it hurt itself? Levi glanced at Joey, who shook his head defensively. Like we said, we just found it flopping around on the ground. Really? Dad started skeptically. So when were you out in the woods? What were you out in the woods doing just now? Looking for another bird to rescue? No, I just needed some fresh air. We'll do a better job cleaning after it. I promise. Let us keep it at least until the end of Christmas break. Dad looked out toward the lake for a moment. A walk. Dad doubled back. You've been acting strangely this whole week. Is there something, you need to talk about? What the hell? Does Dad know something? This isn't like him. No, I'm fine. The crow can speak. Did Joey tell you that? Yeah, Dad said, rolling his eyes a bit. I heard it when I was in the garage. Your mom would lose it if she heard that thing calling out like it did. Dad turned to the barn. This is what's going to happen. You and Joey are going to repurpose the old pig pen under the loft. You'll need to get some chicken wire along the front and a bunch of straw on the floor. Give it some perches to jump onto, too. Really? He's helping us? We can keep Fozzie? Joey asked with a broad smile. Yes, you can keep Fozzie until it's healed, Dad said to Joey, and then turned to Levi below him. When it gets stronger, you can bring it up into the loft for it to strengthen its wings until it's ready to fly. Once down, he lingered a bit, looking at the woods, his son, the tree house, and then back to the woods again. He stood with his hands on his hips. Levi tried not to fidget. What does he want to say? Fozzie's not a crow, by the way, he said. He's not? Levi countered. Dad shook his head and winced, still measuring his words. He's a raven. Crows go caw, caw, while ravens scream bloody murder. That was my first clue. The ravens are a few inches larger than a crow and have different-looking tails. Cool, Levi said, and his father took a few steps back toward the back door of the garage. I don't want you or your brothers out wandering around until they find out what happened over at Haggard Bay, okay? What happened at Haggard Bay? Joey asked. Yeah, Dad, what happened exactly? Okay, Levi said, waiting in vain once again for his father to say more. Noah used a raven to find out if the floodwaters receded. I thought it was a dove with an olive branch in its beak. Nope, Dad said confidently. Noah sent a raven first, but it didn't come back, which meant it must have found somewhere to land, huh? Jesus seemed to like ravens. He said, look at the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than they? Keep it as long as you want, boys. Strange. It was as sappy as his father had ever been. When his father reached the garage, Levi asked Joey, what did Fozzie say? I don't know. Dad just came inside, called me with his index finger, and walked right back out. I heard Fozzie making noises when I got in the garage. Dad told me to go find you and then climbed up into the treehouse. Well, go change into some jeans and we'll start working on the old pig pens. Awesome, Joey said and darted to the garage. Alone, Levi looked up at the fort, only to hear Fozzie cry, Under Willow! Under Willow! You gotta be kidding me. Levi dropped his head. This is nuts. Chapter 13. The Sleep of Death. Staten Island, New York, December 29th, 1985. A narrow spotlight filled the darkness with radiance above the sun, a familiar nightmare for Ansel. Okay, my little movie stars, in 3, 2, 1, action. Then the details slowly began to change. Instead of shag carpet and a musty basement, Ansel Nielsen found himself sitting alone on a massive slab of stone overlooking a lake. Lake Manitou, my father's home. Floating 2 inches above the surface of the water, fog covered the calm air above the lake. Looking down in his lap, Ansel examined his hands, one which was covered in gruesome pink scars around his wrist and up his forearm. In the other, he held a .357 Colt Magnum revolver, with one bullet remaining in the chamber. My father's pistol. He'd taken the pistol out of hiding enough times over the past decade to know the gun felt real, but the bright studio lights above his head felt unnatural. With the pistol aiding his hand as a shield, he looked up into the light and the metal ring surrounding it. "Ready when you are," the man's voice said from the darkness of the other side of the bulb. Shane and Cindy had become faceless monsters in his nightmares. Ansel aimed the pistol at the center of the light, cocking the firing hammer back. "Oh, there you are." A new dream defeated the old nightmare. The sound of a young woman's voice dissipated the scene in a puff of smoke, and when he returned, he realized he was sitting on a rocky point covered with cedars that grew larger the farther away from the lake they got. Just inside the protection of the woods stood a simple hunting cabin, stripped of paint, covered with a mossy roof. Standing at one of the corners, a young woman in a tank top and shorts folded her arms as if agitated. I've seen her in my dreams before. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "We've got work to do." Work? For a moment, she stood her ground, and then she marched across the rocks right to where he sat. Behind him, his black backpack remained unzipped, and without hesitation, she grabbed it as she knelt. "Give it to me. We don't have time for that." Ansel glanced past her hand to her chest and then quietly down at the gun, guilty for even a glance at her breasts. She wore a WWJD necklace. She snapped her fingers and pointed to the pistol. He handed it over, and she stuffed it back into the depths of his backpack. "If this bag is indeed a metaphor for your soul, we've got a lot of cleaning out and throwing away to do," she scolded, her hands digging through it. She put out 2 plastic-wrapped porn magazines and held out as evidence. "This is a new dream. Tanya's in those magazines." The dream girl did not shame him with the magazines. "I suppose we're going to have to deal with this sometime later this summer, but everything else will have to wait." The girl was a few years older than him, but she was not as old as Tanya. She stood and pulled the pack over her shoulder. "Now let's go. We don't have much time." By the time he stood in the doorway of the cabin, the fog had been replaced by another raging storm. "It's ironic that we met in a storm and now we're going to die in a storm," the dream girl said as she sat down on the dry boards of the cabin floor. "What are we doing here? What is this place?" "This is your father's old hunting cabin. It's where you first kissed me. Don't you remember talking about Nightmare on Elm Street and axe murderers using the cabin as a hiding place? This is our happy place, Ansel." Ansel hadn't let anyone touch him in 7 years, let alone a kiss. "I'm dreaming, aren't I?" "No, this isn't a dream. It's a choice. It's the price you paid for a single kiss." "I don't understand," he admitted. "You dropped right into the middle of a war, and no one told you how to fight. By the time you figured out what you were doing, the war was lost. Would you like another kiss?" His dream girl giggled and leaned forward, taunting him with a slight lick of her parted lips. Ansel leaned away. With a nod of approval, she reached down and picked up his backpack with both hands, holding it at the top and bottom. Like hurling a shot put, she launched across the small cabin until it crashed into the wall. "Hey, that's my stuff!" Ansel protested angrily. She reached over and grabbed hold of his chin. "Who are you?" "I'm Ansel Nielsen." "That's right. You are the Cloud Champion, so start acting like it." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Well, if you'd stop wandering off, then we could finish the song." "Oh, what song?" "Focus. You're not going to ruin this all again, and everything has to be sacrificed, will be washed away. We need to work on the song." An acoustic guitar, sheets of music, and an envelope appeared on the floor between them. "I'll give you a kiss if that gets you past it. I'll rip off my clothes and run around this cabin naked if that helps. But I need you to help me with the song. Big picture, Ansel. Big picture." The envelope had writing upon it that read, "Open at home." Then the writing evaporated. A moment later, so did the envelope. The sheets of paper, covered in musical notes, all turned yellow, and the tablatures morphed into some strange pictographs. I'm focused. I'll do it right. You better, she said. She took his hand, pulling it toward her, revealing his scars. With her other hand, she wiped away the scar tissue as if a crust of mud. That black bag and these scars, that's old Ansel. I need my cloud champion. The young woman turned into a shadow, and behind the nebulous form stood a raven. If you're ready this time, she said to him, the raven will show you the way. Don't mess this up, Ansel. Everyone is counting on you. Ansel squeezed his eyes closed, took a deep breath, and then slowly began counting to 10. When he opened his eyes again, his dream girl vanished along with the lake. Well, that was different, Ansel thought as his eyes opened from sleep to see his alarm clock. He took a moment to make sure he was truly awake and then reached out his hand for his lamp. A Shane and Cindy dream, he wrote down as requested by his head shrinker. No Jimmy. He discreetly ignored the pistol and then pondered the other part of the dream. Hot girl, not Tanya. Lake Manitou? Something about a song. He was about to write down a note about a raven when he heard a familiar gurgle outside in the tree. Chapter 14, Fortress of Solitude, Split Rock, Minnesota, December 29th, 1985. Father Gary McKenzie smiled and shook hands as the parishioners filed out of St. Marie's Catholic Church. Today, most of the emotional trauma seemed centered on people experiencing a holiday without a loved one or being triggered by holiday memories. Even though the exchanges were brief, Father Gary made mental notes on whom to visit during the next week. His wounded flock slowly departed the church. At 40, he'd reached a crossroads in his life, and 3 generations of Hiawatha County saw him differently. To the elder generation, they greeted him with the title Father McKenzie. Those from his generation, the baby boomers, chose to call him Father Gary since the Beatles had ruined his identity with the song Eleanor Rigby during his seminary training back in California. The kids, known as Generation X, barely knew the Beatles and had dubbed him after the burger, Big Mac. He'd always been tall, and coming out of high school, he'd been tempted by scholarship offers to play basketball, but his faith led him into the ministry. Near the end of seminary school training, he enlisted as a chaplain to serve soldiers during the Vietnam War, which is how he crossed paths with Brian Forsberg. Because of Forsberg, he found himself assigned to Hiawatha County, but after spending several months going down the rabbit hole, he returned to the surface fully committed to Lily Guerin's Asante Lodge. Although he couldn't find a specific beginning, the Jesuit order quickly fixated on the Anishinaabe people in North America, following their migration from Nova Scotia all the way to where they found the Ojibwe tribe camped along the Great Lakes. With Halley's Comet, the Serpent Star, when Halley's Comet, the Serpent Star, came in 1910, a suspicious accident took the life of the Asante Lodge's leader. Since Lily's brother represented the Benici clan, he took the symbol of the eagle, leaving the black-robed Jesuit Jean Guerin to adopt the symbol of a different bird, the black raven. Now, Gary stood as the Benici, the bird clan. His role was to know all the legends and lore from the Catholic perspective. Although the service had ended, a new song suddenly began. Back in the sanctuary, Nicole McPherson's family rehearsed a new song. As usual, Father Gary had shaken the hand of Gavin McPherson as he left the church ahead of his family. Once gathered, Nicole would keep her children together to practice a new song or two before they'd end practice for lunch. But today, Levi McPherson avoided both the handshake and practice and slipped out of the church. I need to say something to Forsberg about Levi, Gary decided, and headed to his office to quickly schedule his coming week. Since the Ice House murder, Gary had been unable to rid himself of the chill that ran down his spine. While there had been horrible crimes and strange occurrences over the past decade of his time in Minnesota, the return of Halley's Comet brought a foreboding sense of doom with it. With the names of the wounded flock written down, Gary ducked out of his office for home. Past the parking lot that was shared by the Lutheran Church, a small cottage house served as his fortress of solitude. He had a small, detached garage for his silver Chevette and a modest kitchen, bathroom, living room, and bathroom for himself. His rigorous holiday schedule was now complete, and before he left the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of Starka and unbuttoned his black shirt in anticipation of a few days without his priestly garb. By the time he stood in the living room, he tossed his black shirt into the open doorway of his bedroom and kicked off his glossy shoes onto the carpet. Above his white tank top, his dog tags dangled as a reminder of those he'd helped cross over to the realm of death. His head snapped back to the kitchen as the sound of Ann Wilson came through the floorboards of his basement. He had company. Often, his youth groups frequently hung out together in the basement to watch movies, play games, or to listen to music when they weren't studying scripture or sharing life experiences. When one of the curious teens discovered his aging record collection, they'd brought him a new release by the pop rock group Heart, which now played on his turntable. But those meetings were carefully scheduled. He ducked as he descended his own basement stairs, and sitting on the floor in front of the circle of chairs and couches was Lacey Morrison, daughter of Gary Morrison. His heart stopped for two reasons. First, he saw fresh bandages wrapped with white athletic tape on both of her forearms. Dark bloodstains told him what had been done to her wrists. She'd come close to telling him what had really been bothering her over the past few weeks, but instead she'd used the trauma of her Uncle Charlie's battle with cancer as the source for her melancholy. Instead of being dressed for church, she wore clothes more fitting for a night out on the town, a sign she hadn't gone home from her Saturday night. "What is this?" she asked when he filled the doorway of the basement. The other reason his heart stopped was that she'd sat down in the middle of his occult research into the history of Lake Manitou. She surrounded herself with old police records, death certificates, newspaper clippings, books, charts, maps, and diagrams. Knowing he'd have vacation days coming in January, he turned his basement floor into a large table for his research. He'd stepped out of his house by 7 o'clock to practice his homily, which meant Lacey had access to the material for several hours. He ignored the question, knelt on some of his most precious records, and gently took hold of her hands. "Tell me what happened." Today, she was finally ready to talk about it. She told him all about the sexual assault that had happened several weeks ago during a Halloween party, as well as what she'd done to her arms with broken glass the previous night. But 20 minutes later, all the tears had been wiped away. She turned back to the floor of the living room to ask, "What is this stuff?" Gary hesitated as he tried to find words that weren't a lie. Chapter 15, The Black Horse. Split Rock, Minnesota, December 29th, 1985. Driving his Mustang still made Levi a bit nervous. He purchased it a few months ago, and despite an official designation as a muscle car, he kept the speedometer bouncing in a line below the 60-mile-an-hour mark. His buddy, Garrett Johnson, mocked his driving, claiming he drove like an old woman. Garrett invested his own farming dividends into a full-size truck. It's a chick magnet, Levi had told him back in October. Can't pick up girls driving a truck. The 1969 convertible was quite impractical during the winter. Aside from its thin top causing the heater to work twice as hard, the Mustang also had rear-wheel drive, making it twice as easy to spin out and end up in a ditch. Luckily, the roads to Leech Lake were well-traveled and free from snow. Instead of blaring Ormus, Metallica, or Iron Maiden, he went with some softer metal in his cassette deck, ZZ Top's Afterburner. Outside his window, Hiawatha County flew by as he took the same route to Enigum his family took on Christmas Eve. Okay, I should have written down my questions, Levi realized as they grew near and nearer the nursing home. What do I need answered? Hours earlier, he'd had a strange dream that couldn't be ignored. Instead of a small congregation at St. Marie's Catholic Church, an arena full of hypnotized fans shouted his lyrics right back to him as he put one foot on a speaker and pointed the head of his white bass guitar at them, plucking the 4 strings and vibrating the entire building. Surrounding him, the members of Ormus moved like they did in their videos, with Malleus Johansson smashing cymbals, Reese Collins and Murray Smith dueling on guitar, and Ian Wilkinson emerging from a circle of fire at the center of the stage. His dream continued even after the concert ended, as if an MTV backstage documentary allowed him to see the intimate moments of the band, which treated him as a friend and peer. Groupies waited for him, but a stately redhead took his hand and led him to a sports car, and soon he sped away at unbelievable speeds. The third stage of the dream took him into a mansion in the deserts of California, where the beautiful redhead led him through a home and into a steamy bathroom. Instead of ending the dream with her in the shower, a hideous old woman emerged from the mist, muttering strange syllables to him. Vainamoinen, the toothless hag said with a smile. Aaron Miku, the redhead responded with another nonsensical phrase to him, smiling. Then the mist that surrounded them turned into a bloody cloud that buffeted and battered him, sweeping him into a whirlpool. Levi tried to grasp reality, and his grip tightened as the wind blew harder and harder. Suddenly, the old hag's voice ended, the whirlwind subsided, and his clenched fingers released, only to reveal the bulging green eyes of the redhead, whom he had strangled in his grasp. Levi had woken from his dream sweating and panting. Now, he needed answers from Lily. Obviously, I need to ask her about the significance of the dreams, he prioritized. All the omens, in fact. Ravens, willows, and strange women. His snakeskin boot pushed the accelerator at Bacchus. He wore the boots just for her after she taught him about the horned serpent. What else do I need to ask her about? What's the Wintermaker? What's the Song of the Manitou? Levi already understood the basic concept of a Manitou. With Lake Manitou's mythical namesake, also known as Nessie in Loch Ness, he'd grown up with tales of a horned water serpent that lived in the underwater den below the lake. But after his trip to the library, he learned the horned serpent was not only a prevalent Ojibwe legend, but a universal myth as well. Oh yeah, and who are the servants of the Manitou? He rapped on the door of Lily Garen's room. "Hello," he called out as he swung the door open. "You've come back," she said sternly, quickly looking at his boots, then past him. "Your little brother is not with you. Good. I will not die today." Levi didn't know what to say about the reference to Joey, so he started with, "I've been having strange dreams. Have you seen the Takpai yet, the little porcupine men?" "Porcupine men? No, I haven't seen any porcupine men. I wanted to." "Good. The recent deaths will certainly wake them, and I must protect you from them before they do you any harm, which they will. You are too old to serve the Wintermaker, but Your death could be used to strengthen them. Stay away from the water. That is why they are bound. That is where they are bound. She said so much it took him a moment to respond. I live next to Lake Manitou, Nokomis. Yes, so did I. If you are to be a warrior in the fight to come, you will need to stay near Lake Manitou to save your family and many others from certain death. Lily dismissed him with a wave of her wrinkled old hand when he went to speak. This is all you need to know. The Wintermaker is coming. There will be at least 11 more deaths, 10 for his servants, the Takpai, and 1 for himself. When we last fought him, you and I, he almost claimed my brother Magisi, so he will want to claim your younger brothers. We are not going to let him do that, are we? Hell no, Levi said with confidence, yet Lily's hand struck her cheek. His flinch was greater than any pain from her soft hand. No blasphemy, she scolded. Your great-grandfather was a priest and would not approve of your profanity. You are going to perform a sacred duty and must be holy to do this. I failed because of my sins, and now, as an old woman, I must fight once again and finish the loop. The Wintermaker is an old enemy of God, and when I die, the spell I cast over him will be released. What does the Wintermaker want? To defy God. He once was a powerful sorcerer who obsessed with death and dying. He grew more and more powerful until one day he devised an evil plan meant to shatter the plans of the Creator. When he heard prophecies of a great flood and a great fire, the Wintermaker fought against the plan meant to reconcile the Creator and his creation. Instead of worshiping the life-giving Creator, he worshipped death and learned black magic that controls the other world, and in doing so, learned how to trap souls. At first, he experimented with his own family, and then he went out snatching innocents, bringing them back to his lair, until he perfected his evil plan and trapped the souls of the dead within the magical web he wove. When his own death came, he did not look away, for he saw it as a chance to destroy God's plan. How would dying stop God's plan? When Christ died upon the cross, how long did he remain dead? Lily countered. 3 days. Yes, for it takes 3 days for the soul to descend to the underworld, which my father's people called the land of the midnight sun. All those who die are carried upon the river of souls, except for one. Jesus? No, remember, Jesus chose to follow the will of the Creator, and his death was part of the plan. The Wintermaker has lain in his tomb since the days of the dawn, and has not descended to where all men must go. As long as his soul remains trapped at Lake Manitou, the terrible summer will never arrive, nor will any other prophecies about the end times. That is the Wintermaker's victory over God. But together, we will throw his soul into the pit where it belongs. Levi grinned, enjoying her grandiose style of storytelling. If true, I have a pretty epic destiny. How do we start? First, we must finish the loop, and to do that, you must be trained properly. What does that mean, finish the loop? It means many things. First, we must make dream catchers if we are to prepare you for the coming of summer. You must bring me branches from a willow tree so that... Levi perked up. A willow tree? Yes. Have you never seen a dream catcher before? Yes, I never knew they were made of willow. I had a dream about a willow tree. You were in that dream. Of course I was in your dream. You've been in my dreams since I was your age. I am the old end of the loop, and you are the young new growth. We both are part of the same branch, and when you stand at the cave and call out for me, the loop will be complete. I don't know anything about a cave, Levi confessed. You will. It is an unwavering fate. You came to me in my desperate hour, and now that I am an old woman, You have returned so that I can aid you in your desperate hour. The woman with the mark of the Thunderbird. Have you seen her? Thunderbird? Could she be talking about the Raven? I don't know who you're... Wait. In my dream, you stood with two others, a young girl with blonde hair and a woman with a scarred face. Lily nodded. She is the one who taught me the missing verses from the Song of the Manitou. The toothless hag, Aaron Miku? Who is she? Time will tell. There is very powerful magic at the cave. And when you sit there, you will meet her also. Before I can teach you the full song, we must make dream catchers. Can you tell me about... No more questions. We don't have enough time for questions. Cancer's in my bones, and the pain will continue to grow until it clouds my mind. I won't take their pills either. You must hurry. Bring me the willow branches so my work can begin. Go. Levi rose, even if he didn't want to leave. Where am I supposed to get the willow branches? My grandfather paddled across Lake Manitou to a place called Jibe Hollow, but that is too close to the lake. Albert used to bring them to me, but now he is dead. There is a big willow tree in the old convent at the top of the hill. That is where I made my first dream catcher. You can find your willow at the Fisher Mansion. Levi didn't know what she talked about. She must have been confused, for she added, It is at the end of Main Street. Trust me, it is there. Bring me back only the new growth. A lot of it. You obviously need training. He chuckled at her backhanded insult. That's it? Cut some branches? I'll be watching you from the past. You'll also meet an ally who will be waiting under the willow. Albert Fisher helped me in my time of need, and I helped him when he was a boy. The Albert Fisher you will meet will be an old man. You need to bring him a warning for me. What kind of warning? Levi asked. Lily didn't answer, but instead turned to address her door. She returned with a black slouch hat. She looked at his boots and then placed the hat on his head. Now you are also ready to fight the Wintermaker. The Wintermaker is going to be under the willow? No, only Albert. In 2 days, you will close one of the remaining loops. An hour later, Levi returned home. Clouds hung low in the sky, and the air was still and frigid. The big red dairy barn was about 100 yards from the back door of the house, slightly downhill by design. His father kept the large lot plowed, which provided access to the house and side garage, barn, and big machine shed where Levi parked his prize Mustang. Deep piles of snow were pushed between the machine shed and barn, creating a small wall that blocked the gravel road in River Valley. The cows were milling around the open yard, fed and oblivious to the mild winter weather. At one point, Levi almost knew them all by name, but once he had his wardrobe, bass guitar, and 1969 black Mustang convertible, all purchased in cash, he let Daniel take his share of the livestock profits. Levi walked through the outer skirt of the barn, which housed the dairy operation. The storage and containment facility was closest to the house, allowing easy transportation and access. The stainless steel equipment looked more like a science lab than the interior of the barn, and a walkway separated the area where the cows were milked. Levi used this walkway to cut through the outer skirt and into the main part of the barn. Once, Willa McPherson used the big barn as a diverse livestock rearing station, but now most of the large facility was used as storage. The upper level still had a hayloft, but also a practice stage wired for the entire family band Rock of Ages to practice for church performances across Minnesota. Levi took a hard left, passing the loft for the old pig pen. As expected, Joey sat on the fresh straw and watched Fozzie jump from platform to platform. I taught him a new trick, Joey said proudly as Levi entered the pen. What's a Muppet say, Fozzie? What's a Muppet say? Waka waka waka, Fozzie boldly cried out. Waka waka waka. Oh, you've ruined him, haven't you? Levi teased, tussling his brother's hair and sitting down beside him. He's not ruined, he's funny. Along with the strange clicks, warbles, and croaks, the raven now threw out one phrase whenever it looked up, bringing grins from both boys. I read those books we picked up the other day, Levi said. The books on raven lore. What'd they say? Some stories are good and some are bad. The bad ones talk about how ravens are servants of death, kind of like an angel that carries souls to the underworld. I guess it's because of nature, ravens find a fresh carcass before any animals in the woods. Because they're smart. Right, obviously. Even the science books talk about how they are the smartest of any birds, which is why the myths thought they were supernatural. Supernatural? Yeah, more than meets the eyes. Robots in disguise. Levi chuckled at the Transformers reference. In Norse mythology, Odin used a pair of ravens to spy on the world, and a famous Viking named Ragnar Lothbrok used one on his banners to let his enemies know death was coming for them. Cool. The Celts and the Welsh thought they were servants of war gods on the battlefield. Waka waka waka, Fozzie croaked, causing Joey to double over in laughter. Can you imagine being a Viking warrior and Fozzie flies down and says, waka waka waka, right before you die? No, Joe, it's hard to picture Fozzie on a battlefield, Levi admitted and pulled a handful of walnuts from his jacket. Fozzie's feathers quivered and his slight pink tongue flexed. Noticing this, Levi tossed the walnut halves onto the straw and watched as the bird hopped down from the obstacle course of PVC pipe, boards, and cables to get his favorite treat. Even though Fozzie refused to let them come close enough to pet, his hesitation on the floor was a step closer to trust. Snatching the walnut shell in its powerful beak, it hopped back up to one of the many shelves Levi had built for it. Dad was right about the raven being on Noah's Ark and just flying off when Noah released him. Do you think he's the same raven? Joey asked. Well, he'd be pretty old, wouldn't he? Some Indian myths say the raven was the creator of the world. How would a raven create the world? Joey protested. I don't know, but there are a lot of Indian tribes. Many of them saw the raven as a trickster. Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids, Joey said unprompted. You really watch too much TV, Joe, Levi said with a playful eye. Clay, Fozzie shouted after shaking an empty walnut shell. Clay! Clay! Lily accidentally called him Clay, too. I guess that means he wants more, Levi said, tossing a walnut up to the perch, which it caught and rebounded before it could fall to the straw. Do our people have any stories about ravens? The Scots? No, the Ojibwe. Levi chuckled. Do you remember what Donnie calls his dog? Charlie? No, what kind of dog? A mutt? No, the other word, the one with ketchup. Oh, a Heinz 57. Right. 57 varieties, which means which? Fozzie called out. Which? Which means the dog has a little bit of everything. You're a mutt with a bit of everything in you. Great-Grandma Lily was part Dakota and part Ojibwe, so we're only a 16th Ojibwe. Never mind, Joey said with disinterest and began to stand up. Okay, so there was one story I came across about a white raven. Are you making this up? No. It was an Ojibwe tale about how we got fresh water. In the tale, humans were poor and sickly without sunlight or fresh water, so this raven, called the raven who sets things right, decided he could help humanity. This was when a man named Ganuk, who hoarded only the fresh water in the world for himself. So the raven who sets things right flew down to his smoky wigwam to steal the water for the rest of the world. But he ended up staying for so long that his white feathers were turned black. Did he steal the water? Do we have fresh water? Joey took a minute to figure it out. Oh, so he did. He held a smile for a few seconds before adding, I'm hungry. I'm going back inside. I'll be in a few minutes also. I'm just going to hang with Fozzie for a few minutes. Fozzie watched the operation of the door closely, and Levi realized the bird was figuring things out. Even if he did manage to break out of the pen, he'd still have to contend with escaping the barn. Levi held another walnut in his fingertips, getting the bird's attention. Fire? Fozzie nodded his head a bit, letting out a large scream. Did you set the fire, Fozzie? Is that what upset you? Fire? Fozzie nodded and let out a loud, Fire! Fire! Why, though, did you crash through my window in the night of the Ice House murders? Ravens are too smart to do something so stupid. Levi tossed the walnut to Fozzie, who missed it and had to climb down to retrieve it. It still didn't use its wing. Tell me about the willow, Fozzie. What's under the willow? Which? Fozzie said between the stabs of the walnut. Right. Which willow? Levi had not found any along the granite ridge, but Lily gave him new choices. Which willow? The bird fixated on the walnut, stabbing and cracking until pieces came free from the thick shell. Willow, Fozzie. What's important about the willow? Tell me about the willow. Willow, Fozzie repeated, and Levi held another walnut. Yes, tell me about the willow. Willow, Fozzie said, bobbing his head. Levi put the walnut back in his pocket, and the bird flexed its muscles as if ready to dive down. Then, instead of bold syllables full of volume, it attempted a whisper. Close the loop. The loop of the dreamcatcher. Levi had no choice now. Chapter 16. Out of the Loop. Split Rock, Minnesota, December 31st, 1985. The town of Split Rock earned its name when settlers noticed that the granite outcropping that formed the eastern shore of Lake Manitou literally cracked, allowing a small but steady flow of water to pass 100 yards. Although the lake's primary outlet was in the wild rice fields of Buffalo Slough south of town, George Fisher saw the potential of the rocky creek, erecting a mill over the creek, and in the process became Hiawatha County's first lumber baron. As his business grew, so did his wealth, and by the turn of the century, he gifted his home near the lumber mill to his plant manager, Farrell Looning, and purchased the brick convent at the top of the hill, which then became known as the Fisher Mansion to those born afterwards. For decades, the Fisher family literally looked down on the people of Split Rock. But by the 50s, the town filled the river valley and came spilling up the hill. Thanks to a massive financial donation from Albert Fisher, a new state-of-the-art school for the Split Rock Bulldogs was built. Unlike the old school, which had been built near the river, the new facility was placed on the northern edge of town near Highways 34 and 19. The isolation of the Fisher Mansion ended with the construction of 7th Avenue, which connected Highway 34 to Main Avenue in South Division Street. George Fisher's great-grandson, Carson Looning, positioned his wheelchair to face the town of Split Rock. At 29, Carson's wild days were behind him, but his heart yearned for another night on the town. A hunting accident rendered his legs useless, leaving the former jock with the cruel irony of having to develop his mind. With Grandma Betsy spending the winter months in Arizona, Carson became the house sitter, and the 2-story brick mansion transformed into his bachelor pad. Dumbbells, videotapes, magazines, a massive TV, a new Nintendo game system, and bottles of all variety littered the living room floor. Once a week, his grandmother's maid would tidy things up with a magical force of the changing of the seasons. Tonight, though, Carson had no interest in traditional entertainment. Instead, he found his way to his great-grandfather's dark office and peered down at the world through a pair of high-powered binoculars. Just like in the comic books, tragedy had robbed him of his legs, yet technology gave him a new power, the power of observation. Now, in the midst of winter, the trees had dropped their leaves, giving him an almost unlimited view of the Crow Wing River Valley. From the south edge of town along Market Street to the park where the Fisher Mansion sawmill once stood, Carson watched the flow of traffic coming and going on New Year's Eve. Although his voyeurism did provide an innate thrill, this time he used his superpower to be the eyes and ears for the Asante Lodge. He was a guardian of the knife. The binocular lens kept an eye on the distant McPherson farm, Edna Forsberg, Father Mackenzie, and even his parents' home at the old Fisher Mansion along the Crow Wing River. So when a figure walked out across the lawn, less than 100 yards from the dark window, he almost dropped his binoculars. Son of a bitch. The intruder came from the northeast, which meant the intruder jumped over the 4-foot brick wall that circled the property. Carson wheeled himself to the central desk, opening the drawer that held the Beretta 92 pistol. By the time Carson returned to the glass, he could see the intruder did not get any closer to the house. Instead, the figure was in the middle of the yard, approaching the old willow tree. Even in winter, the curtains of the old willow tree partially remained, and after a moment of hesitation, the figure stepped under the canopy. This could be a trick, a supernatural trick. Halley's Comet grew closer by the day, and with it, the ancient magic grew stronger. Both Lily and Sheriff Forsberg warned of different types of monsters coming. Carson quickly swapped the pistol for the binoculars, but by the time he got them refocused, the figure emerged from under the dark canopy. Confirm it. I gotta confirm it. The figure hustled away on the same path he'd come, forcing Carson to leave the window and roll back to the main part of the house. His wheelchair stopped at the bottom of the steep staircase. Hurry before the guy vanishes. The three-story tower with a 360-degree glass enclosure meant Carson had to use a rope to ascend the narrow stairs. There were no stronger arms in the whole of Hiawatha County, and as soon as Carson took hold of the thick rope, his powerful muscles had little problem taking his lower body up the winding staircase. When he reached the top and the more powerful telescope, he was breathing heavily, not because of exertion, but because of the unexpected action. Most of the telescopes pointed toward the heavens, but a few, including his favorite night vision scope, pointed toward town. From his perch at the top of the hill, he could look down upon most of the town. He spotted the intruder jumping over the brick wall, and a moment later, a lone vehicle drove south on Market Street and turned at Old Copper Road. Oh, shit. Carson found the rope, descended down the tower, and wheeled back to his great-grandfather's desk. He picked up the old journal and thumbed to the entries made the final year of Albert's life. "Tonight I closed the loop," Albert wrote. "Just as Lily described, I became an old man who waited under the willow. She was just a young woman. I assured her the path she was taking. For a few moments, we existed in a timeless space before she went off to fulfill her destiny. We closed one loop, but another opened. Moments before Lily arrived, a young man appeared, also sent by Lily. He warned me about the Wintermaker, so I told him about the Omadai." Carson set the journal down and quickly found the cordless phone in his pockets hanging off his wheelchair. His fingers punched out the familiar phone number, and it wasn't until the phone was ringing that he noticed it was past 11 o'clock. "Sorry about that." "Hello?" the gruff voice answered, followed by a clearing of his throat. "Wally, it's Carson. I just saw one of those loops close." Chapter 17, The Flames of Prophecy, Sterling Junction, Minnesota, December 31st, 1985. The house went up in flames moments after Wally Crane picked up the telephone to speak with Carson Looning. He'd been so engrossed in the conversation that he hadn't noticed the situation until it was too late. Now, Wally's arms wrapped tightly around his wife Nancy as the two stayed in the paradoxical void between the frozen snowbank they sat on and the heat coming from the flames in the window. In the distance, a fire truck from St. John came down the road with its sirens blaring, and Wally, in the light of the flame, watched as his world turned to ash. When the lights of the new fire truck came around the corner, Nancy's sobbing ceased, and for a moment she returned to him. "What's happening?" "Unbelievable." "We're fine. Help has arrived." A command van arrived first, and 3 men jumped from the cab. 2 rushed to the burning house, while the other rushed to where Wally and Nancy sat. "Is there anybody else in the house?" the fireman asked, kneeling. Wally shook his head. His girls were all married and had their own families now. In the distance, the sound of sirens signaled more trucks. "Let's get you out of the way. Come with me." Even though he'd been on the phone with Carson Looning when smoke filled the kitchen, the flames spread faster than he could have imagined. How did this happen? When the pumper trucks arrived, the firefighters attacked the house in unison, and by the moment, more and more firemen arrived. EMTs wrapped Nancy and Wally in blankets and set them on the open tailgate of a truck. Wally put his arm around Nancy when she shuddered. The light from the face illuminated her face, which had been washed free of makeup after their 5 o'clock dinner in Wadena, and by 8 o'clock she'd slipped into comfortable flannel pajamas. He remembered her coming into the living room during the Army versus Illinois bowl game, and then ducking back into the dining room to work on her newest manuscript. Fuel for the fire. For most of Christmas break, he heard her fingers clanking away on the typewriter as page after page gathered onto the dining room table. The newest book was the 6th book in her new series, her novel series, Lavinia's Sacrifice, something to that effect. He'd asked her about it in November, and she told him the new title had something to do with the daughter of Titus Andronicus, who died a collateral death in order for her father to have vengeance against his enemies. She was writing when the phone rang, wasn't she? Carson Looning's phone call stole his attention away from his wife and the football game when he began spouting off hysterical theories. "It's the loop. It's great-grandpa Albert's time loop." Lily Guerin long ago explained to the lodge the time traveling by demonstrating with her willow branches. Although time was linear, growing out from a trunk like a branch, it could intersect with the past in the same way the thick end of the willow branch could overlap with the thin end. Lily had experienced several of these time loops, including the one that happened at Good Counsel Convent. Under the big willow that grew in the yard, she'd seen herself at 2 different moments in time, 1897 and 1898. An old man that turned out to be Albert Fisher in 1962, and a young man, which Carson Looning claimed trespassed on his yard just a few moments earlier. I'm almost 100% certain it was Levi McPherson. That was the moment Nancy's muttering turned into angry shouts of accusation. At first, Wally thought he was being berated for interfering with some household system involving dishes, laundry, or the pantry. Her voice filled the dining room. "They're gone! He took them! He took them all away!" With Carson in his other ear and the phone cord tethering him to the kitchen wall, he simply ignored the unprovoked rant. In recent months, her mental health allowed her to be easily rattled. "He's ruined everything," Nancy continued, shouting, and then turned her voice softened. Oh my God. How? How could he do it? Wally had the audacity to cover his free ear so he could listen to Carson's rant about Levi closing the loop. A few moments later, he saw the smoke rolling across the kitchen ceiling. Now beside him, the arsonist sat under the same blanket, covering her mouth in horror, but not in the horror of seeing their home in flames. Her eyes seemed to be witnessing a completely different horror altogether. As water blasted into the dining room windows, Wally squeezed her in a hug and then turned to ask, "What did he do?" "He's going to destroy them all," Nancy muttered, her eyes fixated on the fire. Which question do I ask? Destroy who? All of them. Jude, Vega, Maddie Sinclair, even the fat little girl at the end of it all. He's not the hero. He's not. He's tricking everybody into thinking that with a blink, Nancy flinched and returned to him, her eyes in a panic. "The fire!" Years earlier, when Wally told his father Kermit about his intention to marry Nancy Anderson, his father, who'd claimed he stabbed the horned serpent with a Barlow pocket knife, responded with, "That girl's a bit touched, isn't she?" Now, Wally understood his father's apprehensions. All he could do was pull her closer to him as they watched the battle between fire and water. 1,000 gallons of water pumped into their house, extinguishing the fire that was greedily consuming the dining room. "I think we saved the house," one of the firefighters said while hustling back to the pumper. Wally hopped off the tailgate to inspect the damage. He knew they'd be spending the next few weeks in a hotel room or with one of his daughters, but he wanted to see the garage full of tools, the bedrooms, and even assess the living room to see what has been spared. Yes, there would be plenty of water damage, but the bones of the house looked to be intact. A fortunate blessing. The hairs on his neck stood on end, and he pivoted from where he stood by the front door. The tailgate was empty, and a blanket crumpled on the ground. "Nancy?" Wally spotted her silhouette standing in front of the big willow tree. For 80 years, the tree had stood in the spot where Kermit Crane planted it from a transplanted shoot. For the past 40 years, Nancy spent her summers reading and writing under the canopy of the tree. Like a marionette with its strings cut, Nancy fell to the ground in a heap. Chapter 18, A Deal with the Devil. Indian Head Mountain, January 1st, 1986. Leonard White Elk glanced to the east to see the sun peeking over the eastern coast of the continent his people called the Great Turtle. The 6-year-old man, despite his athletic physique, felt every ache and pain in his body after his overnight vigil on the mountain. Thankfully, the rising sun warmed his face, even if it did little to soothe the pain in his back, neck, or legs. He'd spent the night staring up at the skies, hoping to see the omen known as the Serpent Star, but instead, his heart was filled with an overwhelming sense of despair and hopelessness. "I worry they are about to make a terrible mistake." The last time the Serpent Star appeared, his mother had been living along the shores of Lake Manitou. Fawn Chevril descended from the Wijigan clan, which, according to the lore, had been counting the appearance of the Serpent Star since they lived along the east coast in Nova Scotia. 7 fires, 7 comets, 7 stopping places. His maternal line was Anishinaabe, although the Wijigan clan was considered a heretical cult within Ojibwe society. His paternal line was Lakota, who'd once stood in opposition to the Anishinaabe people. In 1910, when the Serpent Star appeared over Lake Manitou, everyone assumed they stood at the 7th stopping place of the 7 Fires migration. Father Jean Guerin prepared the Asante Lodge for battle against the Wintermaker, with a plan to use the magic of the Philosopher's Stone and Halley's Comet to cast the evil spirit living in the waters into the depths of the underworld. The plan failed miserably. Leonard's mother, Fawn, then realized it was because of Lily Guerin. "Do not trust her," Fawn told him years later. "She is willing to destroy our world for her own selfish desires. For all I know, she has become a servant of the Wintermaker." Fawn left Lake Manitou in 1910, moving to the Turtle Mountain Chippewa Reservation in North Dakota before coming all the way to the Canadian Rockies, which she believed was the true seventh stopping place of the ancient prophecies. Leonard reached a calloused hand to his neck and rubbed his sore tendons, which had spent the night staring up at the sky in anticipation of the return of Halley's Comet. Even though scientists said the comet was near, it was not visible to the naked eye. Prior to his vigil, he felt an unease, so he went to the mountain to seek clarity. His prayers were not answered, and he woke as troubled as when he'd gone to sleep. If Lily's Ouija accounts were correct, 1986 would be the end of the seventh fire and the beginning of the final battle. If his mother was correct, it'd be another generation before the end came. Will the world come to an end when the Serpent Star returns in 2060? Long ago, his people still lived along the Atlantic Ocean, and after receiving the warnings from prophets, the Seven Fires migration began. Although Leonard's nephew, Ben Labiche, disagreed with the oral tradition, the account claimed that after each subsequent appearance of the Serpent Star, the Anishinaabe and Ouija clan discovered the next stopping place. In 1682, his ancestor, Chief Bequenis, lived in the woods of Wisconsin when the sacred water drum was found. Within a generation, the water drum had been brought to Lake Manitou by Chief Weeyipisu, where it was hidden in a cave along the Blue Knife River for generations, until the children of Big Squeak and Winnie Weber discovered it. Even though Fawn Chevrille was a descendant of Chief Weeyipisu, Lily Weber was chosen by fate to be the fire handler capable of wielding the magical stone. Then the schism came between the cousins. At the time, it appeared as if Lily had been a hero. She silenced the evil spirits, saved the life of Jean Guerin, and rescued McGeesy from certain doom. A decade later, when Jean Guerin died, the truth about her victory came to the surface. In exchange for the soul of Jean Guerin and a life of happily ever after, Lily had become an ally of the Wintermaker, Fawn claimed. To the Asante Lodge, Lily remained a tragic hero whose goal in life was to destroy her enemy. With the water drum, the Song of the Manitou, and her guardians at her side, Lily boasted a desire to defeat the evil spirit, but Fawn discovered the method, the Omadai. No one in the Asante Lodge ever questioned her, the lore surrounding the ancient horned serpent, or the magic she invoked, so when she tossed around a ritual using the word Omadai, even McGeesy softened to her plans. Of course, Lily never fathomed the possibility of defeat. Following the death of her beloved Jean, her vengeance only sharpened her desire for victory. At the time, Lily only had a single child, Louis. Fawn's distrust of Lily led her to flee rather than raise her own children near Lake Manitou. Fawn protected her family while Lily left hers at the edge of the fire. For the Wintermaker to win, he needed a host, the Omadai. Like a demon or Wendigo, he'd take possession of a fresh human body and rise from his own death with the tool of his victory, the water drum, in his grasp. Leonard thought of his own grandchildren and the possibility of offering them as bait. He understood the stark difference between Lily and Fawn. Lily represented the concept of free will. Fawn represented the concept of grace. Lily's desire to be the hero was about to turn her into the villain. Fawn waited decades for the path to present itself, and now, 2 decades after she passed, Leonard sat alone at the top of the world, waiting for everything to burn around him. The Asante Lodge called for him to return for help. If I return to Lake Manitou and join in the fight, I'll forsake what my mother believed. He stood up, collecting his belongings, and began his hike down the mountain. If I remain, does that make me a coward? Am I dooming the world by not doing anything? Instead of taking the obvious path down the mountain to his cabin, he took another route and opened his heart to guidance from the great Creator. For the next few hours, the only answer he received was the crunch of snow under his boot. His choice of path took him further down the mountain from his cabin, forcing him on a lateral path for almost a mile from what he'd intended. Looking back up the slope of the mountain, he spied the remnants of an avalanche that had come down the mountain and into the valley and left a tangle of trees, rock, and frozen corpses of animals left for the carrion birds. The symbolism of a dead deer was not lost on him. His family represented the deer in the Asante Lodge. In a sea of white snow, the color of red flesh and brown hide could not be ignored. And a splash of black, night, also stood out as the same stark contrast. Leonard paused on a bluff of exposed rock to study a dark object below him. Had it been summer, the full color of the season would have hidden the object from him, but the desolation of winter brought an acute focus to the straight foreigner. The avalanche had broken on the bluff, sending the whitewash to the east and into the valley below, making the snowpack soft and the passage slow. Finally, he stood above an angular piece of stone that had not been shaped by nature. Darker than ink, a corner of the ebony stone emerged several inches from the snow. Leonard reached a hand out to brush away more stone, but paused. There was writing upon the stone. Chapter 19. Along Came a Spider. Leech Lake, Minnesota, January 1st, 1986. Levi watched as Lily held the switches of willow across her lap, yet she seemed more concerned with the comings and goings of the Rose Parade happening on her television. Levi began to watch the television also, but quickly lost interest. He scanned her room for clues about his great-grandmother. There was a large picture of Pope John Paul I on her wall, as well as a simple crucifix hanging on a braid. There were some Ojibwe talismans, a 4-colored circle, and a string of shells. Between the two religious paradoxes, some cheap, mass-produced art hung, giving little insight or backstory. All the photos on the shelf were in color, with no indication of her life prior to the 1960s. After a few moments of watching the floats, Lily turned back to him, almost appearing surprised to see him sitting on the edge of her bed. "So?" Levi asked after her prolonged inspection of the willow. Lily glanced down to the willow. "You have done well, very well. There is great magic in willow trees, especially this one. By collecting these willow branches for me, you've completed the loop. Did you speak words to Albert?" Levi nodded. He'd done everything exactly as Lily insisted. "Then the past is secure, but the future is not yet set. It is time you and I begin preparations for the final loop." Do I tell her what he said to me? "Shouldn't we be speaking to the Asante Lodge about these preparations?" "No," Lily bluntly retorted. "Some of my plans are meant only for you." "Like the Omadai?" Albert claimed he thought he was the Omadai hunted by the Porcupine Men. Back in 1898, Evo was mistakenly drawn to young Magisi. Upon seeing Levi, Albert cautioned him about Evo being drawn to him. "Obviously, Lily found the real Omadai," Albert had finished. So my prayers go with you, young man. Lily lifted a hand to point to the closet. Last Easter, your mother brought me a ridiculous Easter hat and pants the color of grass. I refused to wear that ugly outfit. Levi chuckled. It is because I'd seen that hat in a vision. Another loop must be closed before we can battle the Wintermaker. When I battled the Wintermaker back in 1898, I sat upon the edge of the Blue Knife River and saw myself as an old woman drifting down the river. My old self wore green pants and a large Easter hat. 4 months from now. I also saw you and your brother traveling down the river in a canoe in my canoe when the water was much lower. You and your brother are destined to find the sacred stone in the cave, and in that moment, when the ancient magic is released, you'll create another time loop. The past, present, and future will intersect again. From 1986, you will reach back through time to help me in my hour of need. You will help me find the Philosopher's Stone so I can travel to Deadwood Island to fight for the lives of my brother and... You've told me this, Levi knew the story about rescuing the man destined to be your husband. Lily hummed and continued. But you will also open a window into the future. A woman from the future gives me the words to the Song of the Manitou in order to protect the loop. For if my precious John had died, the loop would have collapsed. And you would have only been a strange dream in my broken mind. Levi thought of his recent dreams. Who is she, this woman from the future? An ally. She wore the symbol of the Thunderbird upon her chest and commanded the water drum as only a fire handler could do. Her face had received a grievous wound, which affected her speech. Nevertheless, she knew the full Song of the Manitou, which meant she'd been guided by God to find the sacred shell, lost centuries ago along the Seven Fires migration. This woman is the key, and when you close your part of the loop after I pass, you must listen to what she says to you. She will guide you. Pass? Is she talking about dying or just floating down the river? But you'll be commanding the water drum. You're the fire handler. Lily's face wrinkled even more. Bah, I can't think in this cage. Find my jacket. I need some fresh air. Her request shook Levi's concern. Can you do that? Breathe? Of course I can. No, I mean just leave. Do you see the walking path outside my window? What do you suppose it's there for? Walking? Yes, so now fetch my yellow jacket from the closet, Lily demanded, setting all the switches on her bed except for one. Then, with surprising virility, she shuffled right over to the closet to get the jacket herself. She's as bossy as my mother. You don't want your wheelchair? Today I feel strong enough for a walk. Now hold this, she said, handing him a willow switch as she put on her coat. At room temperature, the branch regained its flexibility. Levi's concerns about Lily's alluding to her impending death and another taking her place quickly dissipated. Lily had lived at Wanakawiti Retirement Home since 1962, when she was in her 80s. Levi realized she'd remained relatively healthy and active for her age. Her large down coat made her look like Big Bird as she walked down the hall, but at least she would not be cold. She wants to go for a walk, Levi said, and shrugged to one of the nurses who stopped to question them at the exit doors. Even though the path was cleared, icy patches remained where snow melted on the asphalt surface. Lily seemed to understand and kept a firm grip on his arm. Leech Lake has been a gathering place for our people for almost 3 centuries. One of my grandfathers had a home on Bear Island, but they would not let me stay there. Assembled, so the shells are placed at 7 crossings. They tried to assassinate my husband here, the 7 fires of prophecy. He was trying to rescue my brother McGeesy for good dreams to pass the saying go, and the bad dreams out of the frying pan and into the fire. Day after day, seemed like almost yesterday. After year. For a few days of my life, the Willow Branch Battle of Sugar Point, a sign was the most terrifying child thing I'd ever become an adult in the eyes of Manabozho. I fought the Wintermaker with the proper materials. A dream catcher. Is it really a horned serpent? Do far more about the enemy he'd soon face. Dreams. Like what? Not today, boy. You asked better about dreams, so I will teach you about the legend of the Dreamcatcher. But for now, it's a start. Your raven feathers will. The snow was upon the yard. The snow upon the yard tapered away toward the shore, making it impossible to see where the lake actually began and the lawn ended. Decorative trees were planted along the walkway, some barren and others evergreen. After several moments of silence, Lily began her explanation. When I was your age, I hated my grandfather Nanakonin for being an ignorant pagan, but he insisted on teaching me nevertheless. My brother had been taking to boarding school, and my grandfather grew old. My father rejected his training, so I was his only choice. Do you know the meaning of Asabakashi? It's your family name, isn't it? A clan name. In a way. Asabakashi is our word for spider. Our clan was the Ouijigan, the Skull Clan, feared by the others the same way Puritans were afraid of witches. In the time of the dawn, sometime after the Great Flood, Grandmother Spider spoke to Manabozho about the sad plight of the Ojibwe people, who were spreading across the back of the turtle in search of Migi shells. Do you know the 7 fires? Levi nodded. Anishinaabe history had become his obsession. When our people lived along the Atlantic Ocean, prophets from the future came to guide our people on a sacred journey. From the future? Like you came from the future to guide my path to the cave, Lily agreed, and took the willow switch, bending it into a teardrop loop. Prophecy is a strange thing. It can only occur at a crossing of the loop. Only at the end of prophecy can one reach back to the beginning. The prophets from the future sent those in the past on a quest. Find the sacred Migi shells at the 7 stopping places. Those who believed and left became the Anishinaabe, those who came from nothing. Those who arrived at the 7th stopping place and found Turtle Island were the Ojibwe. Turtle Island State Park, Levi repeated. So Lake Manitou was the end of the journey. Lily avoided answering that. Grandmother Spider knew the journey would be challenging once her people spread out across the lands, so she invented the dream catcher to protect the children from bad dreams. The Omidai will be a kid like young Albert, young McGeesy, or Joey. Did you bring the webbing? Lily asked. Levi had options, but he'd stuck them in his pockets. After brushing off the melting snow, he led Lily to sit. I have feathers in this envelope and leather in this bag, but I wasn't sure what you'd want for string, so I brought some nylon line, some craft thread, and some yarn. Have you seen a real dream catcher before? It is made of sinew, not string. Levi had one hanging from his rearview mirror, but he'd purchased it at a museum at Mille Lacs. Sinew? Animal tendons. There's no magic in string, Lily grumbled. What about the gems? No problem there. I have beads, stones, and even those funny little shells. Migi shells. They're called cowrie shells on the bag. This is good. Finally, I did something right. But the moment vanished when Lily turned to the envelope of feathers. What are these? I asked for bald eagle feathers. He didn't want to tell her about Fozzie. Not yet, at least. I think it's against the law to collect them, but I did find owl feathers. These are not owl feathers. Lily said, holding up one of Fozzie's raven feathers. These are from a raven. The raven is a trickster, so how can his dreams be trusted? McGeesy told me that a raven once followed my father all the way to Lake Manitou. One morning he woke up and shot it with his pistol. He ripped the raven's wings off and stuffed them into his black hat like a madman. The hell with that. I'm not hurting Fozzie. What happened then? My father was killed a few weeks later in prison. Perhaps he should have listened to the raven. Should I go find other feathers? No, we don't have time. I will make a dream catcher with these feathers. But next time, bring me eagle feathers and sinew, even if it is deer sinew. What other kind of sinew would she want?